Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Spark TS webinar today, Navigating Oral Fluids with the new DOT rule. Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Holly Rainwater, and I am the Vice President of Drug and Alcohol Programs with Spark TS. And just quickly, a little bit about Spark TS. We are a full-service CTPA with clinic testing. We have about 3,200 clinics. We do mobile and on-site testing, and we're really excited about our solutions, Rail Tasker and People Tasker, and we are a very proud member of the American Short Line Association, and we do offer drug and alcohol discounts through that program. I have had the opportunity to meet Patrice in person and have had some really great conversations with her. I will tell you what, she is fantastic. We are lucky to have her. I'm getting goosebumps because it's so exciting. Patrice, I am crazy like that. Patrice is currently the Senior Policy Executive Advisor with the National Drug and Alcohol Testing Association, NDASA. She'll tell you more about her background, but she is the longest serving director of ODAPSI, which is pretty exciting. And if you have questions about this rule, this gal is the one to talk to because she wrote it. Without any more words from me for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Patrice. I'm just going to change the PowerPoint here. And I know a lot of people are going to have a lot of questions about other things. We're really going to try to restrict this to oral fluid testing. If you have other questions, if you put them in the chat, we can follow back up with you and maybe help get answers to those questions as well. But Patrice, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Holly, and thanks for that introduction. I appreciate it. It's actually my thrill to be here and to be working with you and to be speaking with the Spark TS. My mandatory disclaimer on I am an employee of the U.S. Department of Transportation currently, and I'm on detail to the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association, NDASA, as the Senior Policy Executive Advisor. As Holly mentioned, the reviews reflected here are expressed in my personal capacity. My views haven't been subjected to review, clearance, or approval by the DOT, and they do not necessarily represent the views of the DOT. And as Holly said, I was the primary author. It's my name on the Federal Register. These are my opinions on it, and that's that. Let me tell you a little bit about the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association, and I'm on this is a public-private partnership between DOT and NDASA. And NDASA really was of interest to me because they are advocates and supporters of safe and drug-free workplaces and communities. And I love the education training aspects. They just do great outreach. They love to provide their resources to their members, as we're doing today. Working with Spark TS. They're an organization that really does the right thing, and I'm very impressed with working with these folks. They are the largest trade association in the drug and alcohol testing industry. For those of you who had heard of DASA before, the Drug and Alcohol Testing Industry Association, DASA merged into NDASA effective June 1, 2023. So there is no more DASA for those who were DASA members. NDASA actually took over those memberships. They did not terminate them, and they are giving people the duration of their membership with NDASA. Again, just a really nice way to do things, doing things the right way every time. The members, employers, including railroads, aviation, trucking, associations, medical review officers, substance abuse professionals, collectors, and folks who are doing both DOT regulated and non-DOT work. And again, the alcohol collectors are involved in this too. Member owned and member driven. Their executive director is Joe McGuire. Her email is here on the screen. And they have a really interesting program called Town Halls. And town hall meetings are webinars that occur every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And the town halls are a lot of fun. You do not have to be a member to attend the town hall, and it's experts like Holly and others who interact to answer questions, and they're very lively sessions, quick moving. They keep them to an hour straight, and just a really great program. I encourage everybody to think about that eventually too. Here's the overview of the presentation. We'll go through each of these individually. The approval of the oral fluid and the timing for implementation. Is oral fluid testing as reliable as urine testing? Is oral fluid testing authorized for all DOT agencies? Because for those, I understand there are a lot of those folks out there who are transit and FRA regulated, and you'll want to know what changes had to be made in order for that to happen. We have a refresher on employer-determined refusals, what employers need to know about their own programs, which is information I recently gathered from DOT. Business choices that are ahead for employers, because adding oral fluid is a huge change. And it doesn't mean you have to replace your urine program, but it does mean that there's more information that you need to have and decisions you need to make. That leads us into standing orders, employer protocols, which I'll go through, and then we'll have a little time for questions and answers. Oral fluid is approved. What next? First, the Department of Transportation, Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, approved it about 4 years ago, and the DOT's final rule became effective this June. It went out on May 2nd. And DOT has to use HHS certified laboratories to conduct testing. No instant tests are allowed. No instant tests are allowed. That means that if you've heard somebody pitching to you that oral fluid testing is now allowable as it's done in the non-DOT world, that's just not true. No alcohol testing can be combined with drug testing either. We're not talking about the saliva alcohol tests. We're talking about and we tend to use the term oral fluid for drug and not saliva. It is saliva. Oral fluid is saliva. But to keep the confusion down, because we've been using the term saliva testing in alcohol since 1994, we therefore went with oral fluid just to make it clear that's drug testing. Here's the thing, there needs to be at least one HHS certified primary laboratory and one secondary HHS certified lab that is available to do the split specimen testing. No labs have applied for HHS certification, and you might question why, and so did we, question why this hasn't already happened. And part of it is the devices are still in the process of being developed by the laboratories, because again, this is not your non-DOT testing. This is something very different. HHS changed some of the cutoffs, and DOT is requiring a single collection that needs to be subdivided. You're used to that in urine, where there's one specimen taken, and then it's divided into an A bottle and a B bottle. It's going to be similar in oral fluid, but standard out there is what we call buffered devices in oral fluid. And for those of you who are doing that in a non-DOT context, you know that's a small pad on the end of a stick, like a lollipop stick. And that needs to be subdivided and put into bottle A and bottle B. And one of the issues with this is when that buffering device goes into the solution in bottle A and bottle B, because it's not urine, there's actually a buffering solution that receives it. That buffering solution in those devices have to be cleared by FDA. And then the HHS laboratory has to have the chemistry on their end. They have to have the immunoassays, and they have to have the other things that they're using, the other chemistry they're using to test. And that chemistry is going to be unique depending on which buffering solution is used. That's one of the things that complicates this. It's not like urine testing where a lab can just step right in, get approved, and start going using the empty plastic containers for the collections. This is a lot more complicated by the buffering solution in the equation. HHS certification usually takes around 3 to 6 months from the point an application is received. Just in practical terms, we're probably talking about the first quarter of next year before we actually see an oral fluid lab approved. We're going to be allowing it for DOT, but not yet. As I said, we have to wait for the HHS to certify a laboratory. And this may seem redundant, but it's not, because we have already seen laboratories rejecting oral fluid specimens because people send them in on a DOT chain of custody saying, we understood the labs were approved. We're sending it to an approved laboratory. That's an approved laboratory for urine testing, not for oral fluids. So please remember, we'll let from an NDASA standpoint, but Spark TS will keep their members in the know. ODAPSI may also issue a notice, the National Laboratory Certification Program may, or people can click on the list of HHS certified laboratories, provided the link in this through the DOT webpage. But you can check on there too. But again, you'll hear it. It'll be newsworthy, and we'll convey that information to our members, including Spark TS, who then certainly get it to you. Is it as reliable as urine testing? That's a question a lot of people ask. And yes, it is. Back in their 2019 final rule, HHS stated, and I give you a long quote here because you're going to have these slides after the presentation, but what I really want to focus on is that oral fluid can be used with the same level of confidence that has been applied to the use of urine. Again, it is as, in the next paragraph we say, scientific and forensic supportability. It is as scientifically supportable and forensically defendable as urine. Important to know. Also, HHS looked at the forensic defensibility in workplace testing. We knew that it was well used in the court setting. We knew it was well used in paroles, in other words, family disputes, etc. But specifically, HHS turned their attention to workplace testing. And there were also questions with oral fluid about passive exposure. Could I test positive because I was around someone else using a drug, and I picked up that drug from secondhand smoke? It got into my mouth because I was on public transit, because I was the driver of a public transit operation, because I was a conductor in another context, because I was a flight attendant who was passing through a crowd of people smoking on my way into the airport. HHS took a careful look and determined that a 4 nanogram per milliliter screening test cutoff for THC would detect marijuana use while eliminating possibilities of positive tests resulting from passive exposure. A key point that's going to be important to you when you consider whether or not to use oral fluid testing, so that you know that it is something that eliminates external exposure and is defensible in court. It will stand up to challenges. Please. And then for DOT, we have several quotes where we picked up the theme from HS. And we recognize that everybody's used to urine testing, but that also means the people who want to cheat are used to urine testing, right? They're using the devices, they're using the adulterants. Every test that is conducted for oral fluid is going to be directly observed, because by its nature, it's always collected in front of the collector. The collector will hand the donor the device, the donor puts it in their own mouth, and then the collector stands there and watches until the device is full, and then the collector will subdivide it and put it into the bottles in front of the donor. All of these are being done one by one, one on one, and directly observed. But an oral fluid collection is going to be much less intrusive on the tested employee's privacy. Instead of bringing out a warm urine cup and passing it off to the collector, there's just going to be a simple passing of the sticks in a buffered collection or the vials in a neat collection where somebody would expectorate into the device. Or if there's another type of device that's developed, the idea is it's just a lot less embarrassing to provide saliva than it is to provide urine. We looked at it at DOT from the standpoint of Fourth Amendment balancing, and that's the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures that are warrantless. And in this case, we, since the beginning of our program, have been allowed to do these warrantless seizures because there's a balance between individual privacy and transportation safety. And all the way back to the Supreme Court, they said, yes, the need for transportation safety in the US is so important that we are going to allow this kind of testing as long as there are sufficient protections in place. We took a look at this balancing, and over the years, we've had to reevaluate the balancing and make adjustments. And we think that this is the greatest stride forward because it actually improves privacy for the individuals being tested, while helping us beat the cheaters and protect public safety. Is it authorized for all DOT agencies? Yes. And this was by no accident. About this time last year, FRA led the charge, and they came to me and they said, hey, listen, would you put our changes into your final rule, as well as the other modes said, hey, that's a great idea. We want that too. FAA, FMCSA, FTA, and Federal Rails all put their changes into our rule because a lot of their regulations had referred to urine only. And there were several other small changes that we made in our final rule. Coast Guard and pipelines did not feel the need to make any changes because theirs did not specify urine, or they decided they were going to handle it another way. But for these other modes, all of whom are covered by the Omnibus Transportation Employee Testing Act of 1991, they wanted the changes. We got them in, and those changes became effective June 1st also. One important thing, since so many folks here are regulated by FRA, is remember, oral fluid testing does not apply to the FRA's post-accident testing program because that's not conducted under Part 40. Your tox boxes, those are not Part 40 tests. Again, just to call that out because that was something all along the way FRA asked us to point out. One more. Yes, there is time for you to prepare. There is work to be done on the employer side. As I said, we were a little disappointed at in DOT because people were not ready to roll with this, but there is work to be done. So we can make good use of this time. Policies are probably going to need to be updated, and FRA is working on this. I've been in touch with Sam Noe. I've been in touch with Ion Rosario from the Federal Transit Administration. She's the program manager there. And she told me also to let you know they're in the process of making these changes. You might want to be aware, since you're in an industry with a lot of collective bargaining agreements, those may need to be updated. If you've already negotiated that everybody's subject to urine testing, I think you're going to find the unions are very receptive to oral fluid testing. We got a lot of comments from unions among our 417 commenters, and the unions very much favored this. They saw it as less invasive, less intrusive, and nobody really quibbled with the fact that we needed to address cheaters. I think we resolved that long ago, but the idea was everybody was comfortable with the idea that this was a good way to do it. So you have roughly about 6 months to get ready from what the labs have told me their schedules look like. Changes directly impacting employers. You, the employers, are the ones who will choose the collection methodology for the test reason. For example, you could say, I want all randoms to start with urine. I want all follow-ups to use oral fluid. You, not the employee, will choose the collection methodology for the subsequent collection following a shy bladder, dry mouth, or other tests that requires a directly observed collection. You would be working with your CTPA Spark TS to determine what's best for you, what's most economically efficient, and that'll be more that you'll be doing directly with Spark to reach those conclusions. Please. Spark TS will already have those business relationships set up with the oral fluid collectors and with the laboratories. And you, as the employer, your DER, will need to be available to the collector to discuss if there are problem collections and you don't have a standing order in place. But if you're working with Spark TS, things should be going smoothly. You'll have the standing order in place. The collection site will know what you expect, both for the regular collections and the problem collections, and hopefully you won't need to worry about those calls coming in. I've noted it's a best business practice to have a standing order in place, and this is replete throughout the DOT's preamble of the fact that, as I like to explain it to people, it used to be when you went in to get an ice cream cone, you got a vanilla ice cream cone. Now when you walk in the door and you ask for an ice cream cone, the question's going to be vanilla or chocolate, or swirl in a case of a problem collection. But in any case, you're going to need to dictate that. It's your choice. Make those choices. And the alternative to having a standing order in place is you'll need to talk with the collector before every single test. Because when your employee goes in, the collectors simply won't know what test to give them. Also directly impacting employers, direct observed urine collections. Not all urine collections are directly observed. Remember, direct observations are your follow-up, are your problem collections, or your return to duty collections. In those, once a urine test moves into a direct observation, if the person declares themselves to be transgender or non-binary, they will get an oral fluid test. You must have a mechanism in place There will no longer be the need to try to find a same gender person for an individual who declares themselves to be non-binary or transgender. But again, remember, there still will be directly observed urine collections for anyone else. Now, I'm going to tell you from a practical perspective, do you really want direct observed urine collections? Do you really want them? Because I remember the railroad industry, and we litigated a few years back because both management and labor thought that direct observed urine collections were just not what they wanted to see for their employees. The fact that you can still do them, and again, this is me, Patrice Kelly speaking, not the DOT. Do you really want to keep doing those? Because they're an awful lot more expensive. They're awkward to have somebody of the same gender stand there and watch your employee urinate. Again, just because you can still do something might be something that you want to question. The fact you can do it doesn't mean you necessarily should do it. But again, regardless, the one and only instance where you will have to have oral fluid testing available is if somebody during a direct observed scenario says that they are transgender or non-binary. Please. Again, I have had people come away from the webinar saying, oh, there are no more urine direct observed collections. That is not correct. And so I try to be crystal clear. There will still be them. But because you can doesn't mean you should. That's what I have highlighted. It may be time to revisit your collective bargaining issue on the issue of your collective bargaining agreement on the issue of directly observed collections. Because like I said, I think you're going to find your unions very receptive to the change. And it's going to be your option regardless. If you choose not to change anything, you just need to have these oral fluids in place for that rare situation. And in 30 years of doing this, I have only heard of 2 actual situations where there was a transgender person who said during a direct observed collection, I don't want somebody of X gender, I identify as a different gender. Not to say there weren't more, but I hear an awful lot in ODAPSI, as did my colleagues. It was very rare that this actually happened. You should not expect this to be part of the population. But if you don't make the change, probably more of your population is going to be saying they're transgender because they'd rather move to an oral fluid test, which just underscoring the fact, remember, we did this and it's going to undercut cheating. If somebody's going to be gaming the system and they're going to oral fluid, they're going to a direct observed collection anyway. And a test result is going to be obtained. So they're probably shortchanging themselves by moving to oral fluid, but let them figure that out. Employer policies. Changes are going to need to be made if an employer's DOT policy lists the following information. And basically that's something that specifies urine. And I understand from Holly that both the FTA and the FRA model plans specifically talk about urine. And that's why I've been in touch with those modes, as well as the FAA, who also has a model policy in place, to just make sure that they are keeping track of this and that they'll have those updated for you to be able to use too. Thank you. Employer policies, you do want to be able to state in that policy whether oral fluid collections will be authorized for shy bladder situations and direct observed collections. Employees do not have this option. They cannot at the collection site say, oh gee, I can't produce urine. I want an oral fluid test. It doesn't work that way. The control is in your hands. And if you're in doubt about your policy, you can always contact the Federal Railroad Administration directly. But again, Holly has been working with Sam Noe on this also. So I think Spark TS is also going to be a good resource for you. For current urine collectors and future oral fluid collectors, we are requiring that the collector's phone number in step 1G connect directly to the collector and or the collector's supervisor, not a general call center. That way the employer can reach the actual collector with any questions. Also, the medical review officer can too. If the paperwork's running late, they have an actual resource to get in touch with. You may also need to talk to them because you need a witness for an upcoming grievance hearing, arbitration, mediation, whatever form you use. You're going to want to be able to reach that collector. And frankly, I had direct experience with working with general call centers. And even though some of the collection sites were willing to give me special privileges as the director of ODAPSI, I said, great, can I share that information with MROs and with employers? And they said, no, absolutely not. And so that prompted the role change. If you can't reach folks, then that's a huge problem in this whole scenario. And we want to make sure that these run effectively and efficiently between the communications run effectively and efficiently between you and the collection site and your CTPA and the collection site, your MRO and the collection site. Please. It's the employer's duty to determine whether a refusal has occurred at the collection site. Since the beginning of Part 40, but especially since the revisions to the rule in the year 2000, so 23 years ago, we have always said it's the employer's non-delegable duty. You can't say, oh, the collection site told me it had to be a refusal. Or, oh, the CTPA said I had to do it this way. It has to be your ultimate conclusion. Now, medical review officer determined refusals are a little different. If the MRO gets information from a laboratory, the MRO has specific instructions in Part 40 on how to declare those to be refusals in the case of adulteration, substitutions, etc. Here we're talking about basically collection site refusals. And in those, you gather the information from your collectors, you consider all the information, listen to your employees, and make your decision. And we all know that in the railroad industry, especially, a refusal has severe repercussions. A 9-month suspension is pretty bad. You don't want to be making those calls haphazardly. The ultimate determination is yours. When it comes to refusals, pre-employment drug tests are different. For all the other types of tests, we start the clock on a refusal basically from when the person arrives at the collection site. If somebody walks in for a random, makes a huge fuss, starts throwing things, that's a refusal. In a pre-employment, we would probably consider a discussion about that if an employee conducted himself or herself that way when they walk in for a pre-employment. But usually that's not what happens. Usually somebody comes in, they're trying to make an impression for a job, but they might decide they don't want the job, either because they got an offer from somebody else or because they don't want to give up drugs and they don't want to be subject to a drug test. In either case, as long as the collection stops before the employee receives, or in this case, we define employee as an applicant. Before the applicant receives the cup, then it's not a refusal. And a lot of employers get confused about this. A lot of collectors get confused about this. Again, that's one thing to keep in mind. For refusals, the employer makes the determination, an employee can provide the information, and the pre-employment test is different. Service agents can provide advice. There's nothing wrong with calling Holly and say, hey, Holly, this is what just happened. What do you think? What's your experience? These are often the kinds of things, too, people raise on town hall. And they say, this just happened on the NDASA town hall meetings. This just happened, and what do I do with it? And so you can be advised on that, but ultimately it's your decision. Take the advice, listen to people who are familiar with the subject matter, people who have experience, but then know it's your non-delegable duty. Also, the DOT, to assist you with this, puts out a handbook, what employers need to know about DOT drug and alcohol testing. Pages 25 to 28 are particularly helpful on refusals, and I've provided the link here. And Holly, if you can advance to them, we'll just show these quickly. It shows what the event is, who the decision maker would be, and what the DOT's instructions are that you would need to know. These 4 are all employer determined refusals. You'll see this one starts with an MRO. These 4, this one is an MRO determined refusal. Again, I think you'll find this chapter helpful, and you've got the information here to be able to look that up. And reminders, what do you need to know about your own program? This comes from my discussions recently with DOT. They ask that you review your laboratory's semi-annual reports. Those are the reports labs are supposed to provide to DOT every 6 months, and question data with your MRO or CTPA. Because we want to make sure that, for example, if you got a test changed from a DOT to a non-DOT because you realized, oops, this was not a covered employee, and you've cleared that with Jerry Powers at FRA, and you're ready to remove that, that's good, but you have to make sure your lab knows that too. That is not going to be provided to DOT in the biannual data. This is going to help to ensure the accuracy of the data that the labs report to DOT. And these reports are actually a good pulse on what's going on in your own program as far as canceled tests, rejected tests, etc. Do take a look at what your data is showing you and question your labs if things don't match. When you're dealing with previous employers under Part 40, specifically 49 CFR Section 40.25, document your good faith efforts to obtain the records from an applicant's previous employer. Especially if you're hiring somebody, we see a lot of it in the trucking industry where a trucking company's gone out of business, and maybe you're picking up somebody from a trucking company that went out of business and you're moving them into the rail industry, or you're moving them into the transit industry. In those situations, you may not get that 4025 records check completed. You may not get anything from the previous employer. And when FRA inspects you or FTA inspects you, they're going to want a lot of explanation as to why you don't have what was required. And so just document your good faith efforts so that they're able to confirm that you did what you were required to do under the reg. And then when an employee has a non-negative result, that's a positive, an alcohol violation, a substitution, an adulteration, or any other kind of refusal, you need to give them a list of substance abuse professionals. And that's for both your employees and for your applicants. Because remember, I said employees include applicants. They need to have those lists, and you must give those to them. Again, check with Holly for assistance and Spark TS for what you need to know about providing the list of qualified SAPs. And then for all tests other than pre-employment, it's a best business practice to escort the employee to the collection site once you've notified the employee. That's going to be much less necessary when you have oral fluid testing because they're not going to adulterate or substitute. But in the current scenario, when you notify employees and they have to leave your work site to go for a test, that gives them a lot of opportunity to go shopping for some adulterants or to have some extra time on their hands so that they can activate their warmers and they can add water to their fake urine powder and they can fake the drug test. Again, we encourage you to do this as a best business practice. We also know that in a lot of cases for FTA regulated employers and rail, you tend to send the collectors to the site instead of sending the employee to the collection site. If you're sending the collector to the employment site, you're much less likely to need to worry about this. Please. Business choices for employers. Using external professional collectors versus your own staff. You have to take a look at whether you're currently doing urine testing in-house or if you're using outside professionals to do this. If you're doing it in-house already, then you probably already have all the firewalls and protocols in place. If you're not doing it already, it's a really bad idea to do oral fluid testing at home, because essentially what's going to happen is if you have it administered by HR, the people in HR who are going to be involved with terminating the employee or who are going to be involved with not hiring the applicant probably are the people who administered the test. I don't think you're going to want to go up against any sort of judicial body, administrative law body, what have you, trying to explain that conflict. Also, you're going to need to have your folks trained and have them remain current. Also, the devices have expiration dates. Do you really want to keep an inventory of those? And in the public comments, many employers said they would not bring collections in-house because of the costs of training to collect and keeping them current. And as I said, a lot of them don't want that liability of having their HR staff doing this. Standing orders, I referenced these earlier. These are not required by the regs. But a standing order is an employer protocol, employer instruction, employer direction, whatever phrasing you want to use. In the preamble, we talked about standing orders because medical review officers under Part 40 have standing orders for DNL isomer testing, for tests that come up as methamphetamine. They sometimes put in place standing orders for THCV, tetrahydrocannabivarin testing. For marijuana positives, we thought of it as, oh, okay, it's just another standing order. I understand for some employers it's very confusing because standing orders has a business meaning for you. And we apologize for that. I'll just say, but I can also tell you, it's just simple, straight out. How do you tell the collection site what you want so that they know for every kind of test? Is it a regulatory requirement? Nope. Can you run a testing program without one? Nope. You cannot, because they're going to be calling you every single test. Every collector is going to be after you to find out what you want. Did you want vanilla ice cream, chocolate, or squirrel? Remember, this is really important. And NDASA does have a model standing order, and I'll provide you some information about that. But the standing order needs to go for the regular collections and also the problem collections. For example, what does the employer want? If there's a shy bladder that has begun, it started with a urine, the person brings out an empty cup, do you want them waiting for 3 hours? Or do you want to change methodologies and move over to oral fluid testing? Similarly, if it's oral fluid testing and the person has a dry mouth, the device is not showing as indicating it's receiving enough oral fluid, do you want to go to urine? Again, that's your choice, not the employee's. Please. Have you started thinking about what you want? You'll need to instruct your collection sites through Spark TS as to what type of testing you want to use in what kind of situation. And even if you only want one methodology, you'll want to be clear about it. And but remember, you'll still need to have oral fluid available for those transgender and non-binary possibilities. You'll want to address problem collections, and you can use the NDASA model standing order format at no charge. Develop your own format or sign one developed by Spark TS. And that brings us to questions and answers. I promised you I'd leave you enough time for that. Holly, you want to lead on that? Let me know what came in.
I can, and please feel free to add your questions on the menu button. There's a place where you can go in and add your questions. I've even had a couple texted to me during the webinar, so we'll go through some of those. One question I see here, is there a different oral swab with the same panel for DOT and non-DOT?
That hasn't been developed yet. We just don't know.
What is the detection window for marijuana? Is the window shorter than urine?
From every account, we do believe the window is shorter than for urine unless somebody's a chronic marijuana user. When we put out the notice of proposed rulemaking in February of 2022, we put out a chart that has windows of detection. And if anybody's interested, that's also listed on the ODAPSI webpage, www.transportation.gov/ODAPSI. And if you go in and take a look at that NPRM, you'll see the windows of detection. Yes, there is a shorter window of detection. For somebody who is only an occasional marijuana user, you're going to have a shorter window of detection. For urine, they're more likely to test positive. But if you have somebody who's a frequent user of marijuana, that window of detection becomes less clear for oral fluid. And that's one of the reasons why we did not receive any comments in support of putting such a table in the final rule. People said, do not do that because it depends on body mass. It depends on frequency of use. It depends on the potency of the marijuana. If in some areas you can still buy marijuana as low as 15% THC, but in Colorado you can get it grown up to 30% THC, and then the edibles and other products can be 60 to 90% THC, which frankly does not give you the chill and the munchies that people expect with marijuana. It causes people to go into a hyper state. But the point being, it depends on the potency. It depends on an awful lot of other things. Technically, the window should be shorter if you're dealing with an occasional user.
I was going to quick, Jessica, I just got a message that the chat is disabled. If you can help me and take a peek at that. Another question that I received, it's more on the process of the collection. Will you discuss employees that smoke, chew tobacco, gum, or coffee before the swab?
Yes, good question. And this gets into more detail than I was originally intending for employers, but I am perfectly happy to take the question. What happens is when a person reports to the collection site, the collector under Part 40 will ask them if they have anything in their mouth, including chewing gum, chewing tobacco, mints, candy, what have you. They'll ask them to remove them. They'll ask them if they want to rinse with water. And if they don't want to rinse with water, that's not a refusal. They can just wait for 10 minutes and then use the device. If the device does not properly read, then it will go into the dry mouth procedure, at which point then the person will be offered more water and they will be asked if they want to drink or rinse with that, and then the process will proceed. The HHS looked at whether or not it would be problematic for somebody to have something in their mouth, recognizing that an awful lot of people do. Chew gum, chew tobacco, what have you, or take a breath mint right before they go for a test. And in those situations, HHS said that's not going to impact the test because you'll have a 10-minute waiting period when somebody has something in their mouth, and you give them that opportunity to rinse. Again, it's the chances that somebody's chewing gum to thwart the test are pretty slim. They're probably just a little nervous before the test and forgot to take it out.
Great. Another question is that in regards to the turnaround time, what is the turnaround time for oral fluids versus urine?
And that's a good question too. From what we understand, it shouldn't be any different from urine. But again, the laboratories will have to come in and get certified. And incidentally, you may be used to dealing with a certain laboratory on all of your urine. That laboratory may choose not to offer oral fluid. So you may be talking about a different laboratory that may be smaller or larger. That'll remain to be seen, but it is expected that it would be the same timing as what's done for urine testing.
Okay. The next one is, will all collection sites have oral fluid available for DOT when the labs are finalized, or do we have to provide swabs?
Not every collection site will opt to do oral fluid. That's up to the collection site. It's a business decision. What we're informing them at NDASA from our point of view is you don't have to offer both methodologies, but if you don't, you have to contact the employer and make sure that the employee gets transported to another facility where the employer is probably going to say, I like doing business with just one collection site. I don't need your services any longer. That's a score on that, but no, it will not default to the employer to have to do that kind of test.
Great. Let's see here. I see that another question came in about a copy of the presentation. We do have a copy of the presentation in the handouts section on the chat. And if you don't see it, let me know and we'll make sure you get one. We've got quite a few coming in here. The next one. Is ODAPSI considering, this is off the topic, but it's because there are some things coming down the pike with this. Is ODAPSI considering accepting electronic signatures for the 40.25s?
The person who sent this missed the ODAPSI listserv, where ODAPSI went out with an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. And they asked for comments on exactly this subject. And disappointingly, there were only about 30 to 40 comments out of the entire industry. Only 30 or 40 people were interested at all in this. The good news is they're working toward a notice of proposed rulemaking regarding electronic signatures, electronic documents, electronic storage, and an electronic alcohol testing form, all of that. They're working toward the notice of proposed rulemaking. Please subscribe to the ODAPSI listserv at www.odapsi.org. www.transportation.gov/ODAPSI. Or if you're like me, I just Google ODAPSI. But at any rate, you can get in there. You'll see the link to subscribe to their newsletter, or to subscribe to their listserv. As employers, you're not required to do that. People who are required to be qualified under Part 40, meaning collectors, breath alcohol technicians, substance abuse professionals, and MROs, must subscribe to the listserv, but that doesn't mean you're not perfectly welcome to. Please subscribe to that, because as soon as DOT puts out this notice of proposed rulemaking on electronic signatures, I'm going to ask everybody to really take a solid look at that. And one of the things I've discussed with Holly, but I haven't necessarily discussed with everybody, is I was thrilled by the comments that I received at the department for this oral fluid rulemaking. We got more comments to this than any rulemaking we had done since 2000, since the year 2000. That was the full plain language rewrite of Part 40. And the reason why the preamble is so long, that was a 220-page Word document that I wrote. Why did I write it that long? Was it just to hear myself think? No, it was because public comment was excellent. People said, whoa, DOT, you're heading in the wrong direction on this. Or yes, DOT, you got this right. When DOT, and I will not be in that capacity, I will be over at NDASA when that NPRM comes out. When DOT comes out with that NPRM, please make sure that you're receiving that information, you're making public comment. When you make public comment, it's not a long formal letter. You don't have to address everything in it. You just have to take a look at the document and say, hey, this is a really good point. I agree with this. Or whoa, DOT, you are off the rails here. Do you have any idea how much money this is going to cost us? Please don't do this. If you do that, DOT does read and listen to what you're saying. Your comments are very valuable. And out of the 417 commenters and the thousands of individual pieces they provided, we were able to make a much better final rule than what we had initially proposed. Again, please know it matters. What your thoughts are matters. And like I said, we did put something out on that already when I was there. And we were really very disappointed at how few people seemed to care. This time care, or it could end up costing you money.
Great. Here's another one I got via email. There are some large collection TPA agencies that send you to the corporate level customer service. Do we expect they will change the way they currently do business, or will they not be approved for oral fluid testing?
It does not have to, it's part of Part 40. It doesn't have to do with their approval, but yes, they can get in trouble for refusing to follow a regulatory change. This isn't guidance. A lot of people, I've heard them refer to the oral fluid final rule as a ruling. A ruling is guidance. A ruling is an interpretation. This is federal law. Remember from your civics classes way back when that the supreme law of the land is the congressional legislation and the US treaties? Okay, next level down, you get into this administrative law stuff, and that's what we changed. This is a pretty important federal legal change. And if you're not seeing your laboratories changing, it should have been changed by June 1st. If your laboratories are not changing, complain now, because this is applicable to your urine testing, not just in the future to your oral fluid. It'll apply then too. But right here and right now, make sure you make it known to your laboratories or your collection sites, rather, that, you know, and I guess I slipped because some labs have these large collection site networks, but anybody who's giving you a corporate call center is violating the rule. It has to connect to the collector and or their supervisor.
Okay. What was the ODAPSI website for saliva urine cutoff windows? I think if you just go to the website.
It was the notice of proposed rulemaking on www.transportation.gov. That was the final rule. It's www.transportation.gov/ODAPSI. And if you're pulling it up on a laptop, if you look to the left-hand margin, you'll see federal court decisions. That one is the final rule. Just scroll down below the final rule.
Oh, here.
A little bit lower, a little bit lower, right below that. Oh, actually, right below that is going to be keep going down. The next one down, August 5th of 2022, was the advance notice of proposed rulemaking on electronic signatures. And then the one below this is going to be the NPRM from February. Yeah, a little bit below that. It's February of 22.
Okay.
Keep going down, February of 22.
There it is.
There it is. If you please click on that, and then we can read the link right off of that. This is the ECFR, the Electronic Code of Federal Register site. But I guess if you go back one step, please, to where it was on the ODAPSI webpage, I guess the best you're going to get is transportation.
I think
So
it's right here.
www.transportation.gov/ODAPSI/FR pubs for Federal Register publications, FR pubs. And then the one you're showing right now is the May 2nd, 2023 final rule. But if you want the NPRM, just go to that FR pubs and scroll down to the February notice of proposed rulemaking. And that's where you'll be able to see the window of detection chart, that 02/28/2022.
Looks like we have another one with a dry mouth scenario, or in the time window between the notification of a test and the collection site. Does that create a dilute result, or what is the practical effect on the result?
A dry mouth would not create a dilute. What it would do is it basically would be a no test. Each device is going to have a little window at the bottom, like your COVID test did. And there'll be a line that shows in the bottom to say, hey, the device is full. If that line does not appear, then you've got a dry mouth scenario. Then we move to the next step, which is either an 49 CFR section 40.193 addresses both shy bladders and dry mouth. That is going to show you what the procedures are that I briefly mentioned earlier about rinsing with the water, giving the person up to 8 ounces, allowing them to rinse. It's not going to be a dilute. It's just going to be a non-result in the first place. Now, the question is going to be, as the employer, did you choose to continue with oral fluid testing if you're faced with a dry mouth, or did you choose at that point to go to shy bladder? I'm sorry, to go to urine. HHS says it's highly unlikely that there'll be people who have shy bladder and dry mouth unless they're really gaming the system. And what we tell medical review officers in the reg is if something starts as one, let's say it starts as a urine, it becomes a shy bladder, then you proceed to oral fluid per the employer's instruction, and it's a dry mouth. The shy bladder goes dead. There's nothing further that happens with that. Then the MRO is just going to be evaluating what the referral physician says for the dry mouth. But there's going to be nothing with respect to the shy bladder. Again, an important point to remember that the MROs are not going to be sending somebody out for 2 different referral physicians and trying to reconcile 2 different sets of answers. It's just going to simplify the process down to 1.
Perfect. And I think it's worth noting with that dry mouth scenario there, like we have in shy bladder, the scenario where you can drink up to 40 ounces, you have that 3 hours to provide. The regulations do have that written out for dry mouth as well. They are limited to what they can do during that time window. Let's see here. Again, this is somebody looking for just verification. Again, are employers required to subscribe to ODAPSI listserv?
No, you're not required, but it keeps you in the know. They don't spam you. You're not going to get something every day. You're only going to get something when it's relevant to your business. Do you want a free notification that's relevant to your business that comes up only when necessary? To me, it's essential to doing business, but it is in no way required by the Department of Transportation.
It's a good practice, though, to get that you're in the know for sure.
Definitely. Keeps you in the know.
Yeah. And I think that looks like all the questions. I would recommend everybody on the call read the preamble. There's a lot in the preamble, a lot of why we're doing what we're doing. If you're going and talking to your unions, there is information in there that you can pull out talking about that it is valid, it is just as good as urine, and it talks about those direct observation procedures. I know before the webinar I read it today and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot all about this. Read it, keep it close to you because it is a great reference as you are changing your procedures. And again, copies of the, and Patrice wrote it. But it is really, it's just, I just think it's a really great reference for all of us in this industry. Again, we'll have the webinar recorded. So if you'd like to go back and go, oh, what did Patrice say about this again? You can go back into the webinar, watch it again. Patrice, we are so thankful that you took time out of your very busy day, career to really spend time with our the people on this call. We've got MROs, we've got DERs, we've got collectors. It looks like we've got a wide variety of people. We really do appreciate your time.
You are very welcome, and thank you for inviting me. And thank you to every single person who watched this, because I know you took time out of your day to do this, and you're the ones who really make these regulations work. We can sit in Washington and write all these, but they don't mean anything unless you're out there doing them. Thank you for being so important to transportation safety. Thank you for all you do.
And I put up NDASA's information. If you've got information that you do have questions about, NDASA is a great resource for you. I've got my information on here. And again, I thank all of you for coming. If you have any questions or anything that comes up, please feel free to reach out to us. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.